So we back again, man. I I told you guys that we were gonna be back. I had really had to fix what was going on, and I told y'all we was gonna be back. We got another video here that we're gonna be reacting to. I kind of like this little setup to react to videos and stuff like this. It's cool to me because I don't have to. Cause like when I'm teaching, like on a regular basis, like when we doing Bible study and stuff like that, it's interesting as far as how we kind of read the Bible and all of that stuff. And I think I want to do that as far as doing these types of reactions and stuff like that. But doing it in another type of format, and I'm gonna figure out how to do that. I know one of my homies, they want to actually do the reaction videos and stuff like that. So I'm gonna figure out how we gonna be able to do that, and give y'all very good content at the same time. Right now, we got this video from Pierce Morgan. We have a video from Pierce Morgan that I wanted to watch, and this is Pierce Morgan uncensored, and they're talking, having a conversation with Officer Tatum, Cenk, Uygur, and Destiny. And then I don't know who this other woman is. I'm not really familiar with her as far as internet goes. But I am familiar with the other three fellas on the panel as well as Pierce Morgan. So what we want to do is watch this, and I'm gonna break this down because there was a lot of stuff that I was hearing. I was like, man, this is one of those times I need to just make a video. So here's the video. We'll start it off, and as we're going along with the video, I'll stop like we typically do.
Really leaning into their childless cat owning persona and just owning it. And I can think of more offensive things that have been said about women than owning cats and being childless. So I don't think it's gonna hang around. I think it's
talk over each other, but hang on. Let me bring in Destiny to respond to that question.
Yeah, the president signaling that he might be okay with a thing at this point is irrelevant. Roe v. Wade was overturned. The idea that this court cares about legislating from the bench when they've granted the president criminal immunity, which is something that is completely unfounded in any part historically of our legislative tradition, of our judicial tradition, or in the Constitution. The idea that the president might signal that he's okay with abortion pills sent through the mail doesn't matter if a state now has the ability to heavily restrict or outright ban abortion. And that's
See, this is the problem with this conversation, is because as you're gonna see, is that in this conversation, he's gonna literally try to make it seem as if moving abortion from the federal level to the state level is a outright ban on abortion, and it's not. If you are legislating what should happen, it should not be, there should be restrictions placed on it, period. Point blank, period. There should be restrictions placed on abortion. I don't know anybody who can run around here and say, oh yeah, we should do it all the way up until birth. Like, if that is that what we're talking, is that the conversation? Because if there's a restriction, then it is up to the states to say legislatively what that restriction is to be. It's not a ban if it's a restriction. There's a difference between a ban. A ban is saying that you cannot do this at all, point blank, period. However, a restriction is totally different. A restriction says you can do this, however, these are the parameters you must operate with inside of if we are to do this. So I'm gonna back it up just a little bit because the conversation started back here.
I don't like being talked about in a derogatory manner, and they may not want government to interfere with their bodies and so on. Are you not worried that this is going to be a big problem come November?
I don't think so. So abortion was never banned. What they did, they returned it to the states, which is the way that it should have been the whole time. Roe v. Wade was legislated. Roe v. Wade was legislated from the bench, which is unconstitutional. So what Dobbs did is it just handed it back to the states, and it told Congress, if you can write a law, then we'll legislate this law. Or if you can legislate this law, then we're going to rule on this law and tell you if this law is constitutional. So they handed it back to Congress, handed it back to the states. Congress tried to pass a law to codify abortion, and it failed. So it's still in the hands of Congress. If they want to write a law to codify abortion, then they can, but they haven't successfully done that yet. So until they do, it's back in the hands of the states.
Okay.
And that's exactly right. Like, this whole argument that they banned abortion is foolishness, because that's simply not the case. That's not what a ban is. A ban is completely saying something is not allowed, point blank, period. It does not matter. And what they did was took it off the books at the judicial level, which is at the federal level, and gave the power back to the states to legislate it. That's it. Exactly what she said. Now, if they wanted to bring it back into it, they need to write a law. But right now, Congress cannot come up with a law to codify it at the federal level. So it's not a ban. It's not federally saying, oh, you can't do this. It's just saying that the power is no longer the power is no longer at the federal level. It's at the state level. And they're going to sit up here and try to lie and play loose with words. In a moment, you'll see that.
Yeah,
Destiny,
because Republicans have blocked it.
What they had tried to do.
The Republicans are the ones that want to ban abortion. Why don't you be honest about it? Why don't you be honest about it? You want to ban abortion. You want to take away women's rights.
Why don't you be honest about it? Republicans are not banning
That's a
abortions.
fact.
That's not a fact. Abortions.
They are in red states.
First of all, Donald Trump.
That's a 100% fact.
Donald J. Trump at his rally, which ticked me off because I want abortions to be banned. But Donald Trump said he's okay with abortion pills sent through mail. That's 2/3 of all abortions are done through abortion pills. He said it was fine. The Supreme Court ruled that was fine. Donald Trump said he's okay with abortion up to 15 weeks. Where on the platform of the Republican Party do you see Republicans banning abortions?
There's literally, Georgia has an abortion ban at 6 weeks. The idea that somebody be okay with something in the mail is not relevant.
Let me bring in. Hang on.
Listen to what he said. He said up to 6 weeks in Georgia. Up to 6. So it's not a ban. That's not a ban. It's up to 6 weeks. It's up to 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, you can't do it. So that's not a ban. That's a limitation. What they are fighting for is for there to be no limitation on abortion. That's what they're fighting for. Again, how do we know this? It's because of the policies that they continuously fight for. They are fighting for there to be no restrictions at all, at any time, on any woman as far as it concerns abortion. That's a problem. When Kamala Harris was asked the question up to how many weeks on CBS, she could not even come up with a time frame to which it's supposed to be. So they're clearly lying. It's clear. It's literally right here. It is clear right in front of our faces, showing us that they don't want any type of restrictions on it. That's what it is. They don't want restrictions. So they come up with this lie and say, oh, all Republicans are banning abortions, and that's not the case. It depends on the state to which you're in, what the restriction is.
Don't talk over each other, please. Hang on. Let me bring in Destiny to respond to that question.
Yeah, the president signaling that he might be okay with a thing at this point is irrelevant. Roe v. Wade was overturned. The idea that this court cares about legislating from the bench when they've granted the president criminal immunity, which is something that is completely unfounded in any part historically of our legislative tradition, of our judicial tradition, or in the Constitution.
And I find it weird that he's even having this argument about immunity for the president in a conversation about abortion and child rearing. You see how, like, I hate the way that most of these liberals argue. These liberals will argue and say, and this is not me being like hyper conservative, so please don't say that. What I'm saying is the way that liberals typically argue in these spaces, and these are people who consider themselves liberals. Most of these people who consider themselves liberal in these spaces, the way that they argue, they will say something, right? and then they will try to make a correlation with something that's not even in the same ballpark. Presidential immunity has nothing to do with what we're having a conversation about. We're just not having that conversation right now. But you're choosing to have this conversation and mash all of these things together for whatever reason. I have no clue. But at the end of the day, that's not what we're even talking about. Why would you even bring that up in this conversation? I don't get it. That's weird to me. But I know he's playing games. He's playing fast and loose.
The idea that the president might signal that he's okay with abortion pills sent through the mail doesn't matter if a state now has the ability to heavily restrict or outright ban abortion. And this idea that Republicans don't want to ban abortion, that's... I don't even know who you're talking to right now. That's great, but what Cenk said was absolutely correct. What Cenk said was correct. If you go and look at the restrictive abortion laws that exist throughout the country right now, they are far more restrictive in Republican states, and some of them you might be pregnant, you're not even going to know, and by the time you realize you're pregnant, it's already banned for you to get an abortion.
We live in a republic.
J.D. Vance was talking about the people without children.
Let me just play a clip. I want to play a clip because well, we talked about Supreme Court and reverting rights to states and so on. Let's play a clip. This is from Joe Biden's speech after 60 years of a civil rights bill. It was a bit rambling. I listened to it. It didn't make sense, a lot of it. It was a typical, I'm afraid, rather sad delivery by the president. But he made this point about the Supreme Court.
And most recently and most shockingly, the Supreme Court established in Trump versus the United States a dangerous precedent. They ruled, as you know, that the President of the United States has immunity for potential crimes he may have committed while in office. Immunity. This nation was founded on the principle there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law.
So, Cenk, I mean, what he was trying to say, and you also have to try and interpret it, but Joe Biden he's not going to get this through, obviously, before the election. But what he's trying to do is get rid of this idea of presidents having immunity for crimes committed while in office. He wants term limits for Supreme Court justices that many people think would politicize it, because it would give people an incentive to behave in a certain way, which may then help, for example, them having a future presidential run or some sort of business plan, whatever it may be. He also wants a binding code of conduct for the High Court. What do you think of?
I actually agree with that. I really do agree with that. I think all of the Supreme Court justices, I think there should be term limits placed on anybody who's in government. It don't matter who it is. It should be Congress, the Senate, the executive branch, everybody, the judicial branch, everybody should have term limits. None of that stuff should be for life. Because you should have people representing the ideals that exist during the time of their residency. And I do think that Congress, at the legislative branch, at any time, should have a term limit of about, let's say, about 8 to 10 years. I think they should have. I think that's fair. I really think that's fair. We need to have a revolving door of people coming in and out. We don't need to have these lifelong people like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, staying in power in these places of power this long and not getting anything done because they're stuck in their old ways. I do agree with that. But this whole immunity for the president, this isn't just something that's going to work for that works for President Trump. It works for President Biden as well, because we know that Biden did a couple of things inside of his presidency that could be looked at as being illegal. So I mean, it just depends on who's in power, who wants to put who under scrutiny and all of that stuff. That's what it depends on.
Of these reforms, are you in favor? Are you in favor of some of them, against others?
Yeah, so look, I think the Supreme Court is one of the most corrupt institutions in America. I wrote a whole book about it called Justice is Coming, and how they actually wound up perverting both the Republican and the Democratic parties because they allowed infinite money in politics. And it was a scheme to allow corporations to basically buy our government, and that's what they've executed. So I loathe what the Supreme Court has done. They've institutionalized corruption. Having said that, there are some solutions that make sense and some that don't. So I don't believe in packing the courts. I think that that was a very bad idea by Pete Buttigieg. I think term limits is interesting, and I think that maybe the right wing might agree to it if we had more liberals on the court. Now that they have more conservatives, of course, they won't be principled and will never agree to it. Ethics code should be basic. We should all agree to that. They're taking these fabulous vacations and getting basically millions of dollars in value from incredibly rich people who run corporations, and then they rule in favor of those corporations. It's just about as corrupt as it could possibly be.
All right, Officer Tatum, the problem looking at it from the outside is...
Yeah, it's weird because one of the things that Cenk, and this is something that that Cenk talks about a lot, and this is one of the reasons why I was a Bernie bro at one point in time. I actually wanted to vote, and I was actually somebody who wanted to have Bernie Sanders in office because I liked some of the programming that he was talking about, giving the American people, as well as some of the talks that he was talking about, you know, for our people or whatnot. But mainly, there's a lot of lobbying that goes on that pushes the narrative of companies having a lot of power that they should not. And this is something that is true. We should be regulating how much money a person could be able to get as far as lobbyists go, but also how this lobbying even works, because there's a lot of underhanded things that go on with inside the government that creates this type of vacuum of power, where we have people who get into office simply to be able to usurp the money from one another and get those lobbying dollars in their pocket, so when they retire, they set straight. They can buy an island somewhere and not care about how they left the American people, right? So it's not a government based off of, it's not, our government officials are not here to do anything but business as usual. All of it is about business. The whole thing is built on business. It's a business model, whether you want to call it capitalism or not. It's corruption at the end of the day. And we should be talking about what's going on as far as the monies that are being usurped from the American people in order to be placed in the hands of these lobbyists, or the monies from these companies as speech, used as speech to take control over what's going on in the government.
Is that when you have, as Donald Trump found in his last term of office, the ability to pack the court with 3 of your own in one term, it does lead to an imbalance which you would be crying foul about if it was the other way around. What is the answer to that?
No, I wouldn't be foul. I wouldn't be crying foul about it if the other way was around. I mean, if the roles were reversed, because I understand the process and I understand the way the government works. If there's a Republican in office and the seats are open, the Republican can get someone into that position. And if the Democrats can do the same thing, if somehow Clarence Thomas is timed out when there's a Democrat in office, they're going to put a Democrat in his place. And if somehow someone else dies that's a Republican on the Supreme Court, they're going to put another Democrat in. That'll be 2 Democrats on the Supreme Court. It's just so happened to be timing. And that's why presidential elections are so important, and that's why they're so consequential. I think that the crazy thing is that out of one side of the mouth, the left cry that the Supreme Court is doing the right thing by blocking all of Trump's advances, that the election was stolen. But now all of a sudden they're ruling in his favor. Make your mind up. If they're supporting Trump, then they would have allowed the election interference, election fraud cases to go straight through. They would have ruled on it in Trump's favor, but they didn't. They didn't even look at it. So I think the Supreme Court is balanced and is fair. They just don't like the fact that people are leaning more conservative. I don't like everything the Supreme Court does, but it's fair and balanced and co-equal branches of the government.
Should there
now,
be
if
term
you want
limits?
term limits, well, if we're going to do term limits for Supreme Court, let's do term limits in the House and Senate, and I'll be totally okay with that.
Okay, Destiny, what's your view of this?
And before Destiny goes, because Destiny is like far off on the cliff most of the time. Well, like I said, most people, regardless of what side of the aisle you talk about, most people want term limits for all of these people. They don't want to see these people forever and ever and all, man. Like my grandmother should not be remembering people's legislation, right, that they placed in that are still in power 30 something years later. Like almost 40 years later. I'm almost 40 years old, right? So we shouldn't be sitting here saying, oh, we shouldn't be having term limits. No, everybody, but everybody, it doesn't matter who it is or what side of the aisle it is. Everybody who is a common American agrees that we should have term limits. The only people that don't agree that there should be term limits are the people who are in power. And that's something that should be voted on. There should be legislation that should be put in place. And I think if we were to do that, it would be bilaterally or across the board. All Americans would vote and say that we need term limits. And I really do think that. I think we as Americans should be lobbying for term limits for all parties in American government. Point blank, period. Or we're going to start voting these people out until we get people who want. We should be getting people out. That's what I think. Term limits, yes.
Yeah, so firstly, the idea that if you're a Democratic president and you get to nominate and have a Democratic Supreme Court justice, that's an interesting concept in theory, but I seem to remember that Obama had spent almost a year with a vacancy on the Supreme Court that McConnell explicitly said he was going to deny a hearing for, which was insane. The Democrats were robbed of a Supreme Court seating there, and who's to...
This is what I was talking about. That whole, he's about to go off into La La Land about this. The process is the process. The process is the process. You cannot get mad that the process didn't work the way you wanted it to work, right? However, if there is a Democrat, this is why you have to vote. This is why you got to vote. This is why you got to look at people's platforms and their policies and who they shaking hands with and who they would think that they were put in these different positions. That's why all of these softball questions that they keep on asking these pundits is the craziest thing in the world, because you're not informing your constituents about what's going on. You're not informing the constituency. So for anybody to sit here and say, oh, well, you know, it's not really like that. Yes, it is like that. That's the process. That is the process. The process is, and always has been, whoever's party is in power, if there is a seat open, you can put somebody who aligns with your party in position. It's fair. It's balanced. That's how it is. It's just timing. If the seat opens and y'all decide to not put somebody in there, whose fault is that? You need to talk to. You should be talking to those who are in power who represent your party. That's their problem.
Say if Republicans would ever seat a Supreme Court justice, maybe next time it'll be 2 years before an election, and they're saying, well, maybe we should wait for the next election cycle. You have to keep in mind that when the court was created, the reason why there are lifetime appointments is because justices, Supreme Court justices, are supposed to be insulated from the political pressures relating to running again for office and all of the other things that go into having to keep in mind like an election season. However, all of that, as Cenk rightly pointed out, is completely destroyed if you are taking bribes or getting paid or getting some kind of compensation based perhaps on the way that you might rule in the court. So an ethics guideline, I don't know how anybody could be opposed to that. And the nice thing about term limits are people focus on term limits as like term limiting a person, which is fine, whatever. The nice thing about term limits isn't necessarily the term limit. It's that you could apportion so that every single president gets either 1 or 1.5 picks, depending upon what you actually put that term limit as, which I think everybody would agree would probably be fair. If every president was guaranteed the same number of Supreme Court picks, it means that the composition of the Supreme Court would roughly align with how Americans are voting for president, rather than this idea that, hey, maybe you'll get really lucky and one president, you know, if Trump were to win again, if Sotomayor were to, God forbid, die or step down, maybe Trump, one president, gets 4 Supreme Court picks, which is insane.
It's just,
I think, Josie, the reality is, well, hang on, Josie, the reality is, isn't it, that had it been the other way round, had Joe Biden been able to pack the Supreme Court with 3 very progressive judges, I think Republicans would have gone completely nuts. And there's the problem, is that it doesn't really matter which side is doing it. If you have the ability in one 4-year term to have that kind of significant sea change in the makeup of the Supreme Court, doesn't it lose its ability to be impartial?
Well, we had a liberal leading Supreme Court for 60 years. And now it's the first time where it switched and it's starting to lean conservative again for the first time in a long time. Now, if you want to add term limits to the Supreme Court, that would require a constitutional amendment of Article 3. And that would mean two-thirds of Congress and 3/4 of the states would have to agree to term limits on the Supreme Court. So that's just not something you can wave a wand and do. Also, it'd be unconstitutional to punish a president for performing his enumerated and implied powers. And SCOTUS, when they had said that they weren't going to criminalize this, SCOTUS had asked the lower courts to determine that scope, but no one's really talking about that part. It was SCOTUS had sent it back to the lower courts. They didn't just rule on it blindly.
That is completely and totally not true. This is misrepresented by conservatives so much, okay? So there were 4 different actions that the court spoke about. Roberts ruled one of them is qualifying for absolute immunity, this first bucket of things that he's created, by the way. None of these things have existed historically. There are other things now. All of the other acts are presumed immune, meaning that the state, or the government in this case, has to bring a reason why they should be able to probe these actions in a way that will never damage the executive's ability to operate in the future, which encompasses all of the other actions that are spoken about in the Supreme Court case. The reason why they have a problem with the immunity of the president is because Donald Trump is going to be president again, and they don't want Donald Trump to do it. They don't want they want the ability to be able to run it up on Donald Trump as much as they can, as much as they did last time. They want to run it up on him and create issues with inside of the government to make it hard for him to actually do anything in government. That's really what this is about. This is a short-sighted idea. They're being short-sighted because they don't like Donald Trump. That's really what it is. They remanded some of that to the lower court was for the lower courts to now have that argument over the presumptive immunity. Criminal immunity has never existed in any size, shape, or form for any politician in this country in the history of the United States. And the idea that a U.S. president, that we came from a rebellion against a king, that our president is now criminally immune for performing his duties, why would we ever assume that he needs that type of immunity?
That's not true.
It's true.
When was the president immune for criminal immunity?
There's a process for
I don't even know. Wait, when was the president immune from criminal immunity? What?
There's a process for when a president commits a crime, and that process is outlined in Article 1. It's
I'm sorry,
to impeach
what
him.
is that process?
Look.
Hold on. No. Impeachment has nothing to do with criminal liability.
So when when a president
with all due respect,
he don't know nothing about what impeachment is. How do you not know what impeachment is? You're having a conversation about immunity from the president to be prosecuted in these things for the things that he's done as a president, but he can be removed as president. He can be removed as president. If they find him guilty, they can remove him as a president. And then he's no longer a president, a sitting president. He is now a what? Private citizen.
You have no idea what the structure of our government is. I'm so sorry, okay? Impeachment is a political process that you use to unseat somebody, and once they're unseated, you can prevent them from holding future office.
Yes!
Franklin, for instance,
yes!
Impeachment was created so that you didn't have to either assassinate or fabricate criminal charges to remove somebody from office. Impeachment has nothing to do with criminal liability. The maximum conviction sentence you can get for being impeached is just being removed from office and prevented from taking seat in future office. That's it.
No, it's not.
All right. Let me just...
Yep, I literally just told y'all that this man is on a cliff. He's so far left, he's on a cliff. He doesn't know anything he's talking about. If a president is impeached, he is no longer in office. Meaning, they will put somebody else on it. Right? Yeah, he might get away with murder, but he's no longer president. What is the problem here?
I just want to move on. I want to move on. We discussed that at length. I want to move on to Trump's latest interview with Laura Ingraham at Fox News, in which he said this about Kamala Harris.
She got rid of the laugh. I noticed I haven't seen that crazy laugh that she got. She's crazy. That laugh, that's the laugh of a crazy person. But I noticed that she's not using that laugh anymore. Somebody convinced her, don't laugh, just don't laugh. Don't laugh under any circumstances because you...
I like laughter, but sometimes.
Not her laughter.
Is this what we picking?
Now, Tatum, what do you make of that? I mean,
Are we
Kamala Harris
picking?
does have a weird laugh.
Is this what we picking apart? Man, I'm good on this part. I don't really care for picking apart little funny stuff like that. That's just Donald Trump being Donald Trump. We can't be mad at Donald Trump being Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump. He's going to say things that we don't agree with. He's going to do things that we don't agree with. That's just Donald Trump. But that's any politician. Like, are we really on this Donald Trump hate train so much that it's like everything he says has to be under a microscope. It's just weird to me that we have to put everything and anything regarding Donald Trump under a microscope. But then when it comes to the politicians that we quote unquote like or care about, it's like that microscope is not there for them. That's weird for me. That's always gonna be weird for me. So, you know, I don't know what to say in this situation. It just kind of is what it is at this point. You know, it just is what it is at this point. I don't even know what to say. But yeah, man, I appreciate y'all for tuning in, man. Much love to each and every last one of y'all. I'll catch y'all later.